folks. Just bear with me while I get set up. Just wanted to do a short video. This will be kind of a... there's a series I've been planning to make that's going to be called Sapientia ex Fabulum. Now, my Latin isn't great. I may have pronounced that wrong. But what it basically boils down to is wisdom out of fable, or fiction. Or legend. It depends on the translation you're looking at. But I've got two pieces of pop culture posted here, and just wanted to discuss these in the context of the current Russia-Ukraine conflict, because I know that anxiety has become an issue for the younger generation, far more than it was for mine. We had stress, but apparently you guys have anxiety. This won't be restricted to over 18s. This one will be up for anyone who wants to watch it. But basically, I wanted to talk about what it was like for me when I grew up during the Cold War. Now, I was fortunate enough to grow up in Newfoundland, and while Newfoundlanders do have something of an outsized ego about the importance of our tiny little insignificant island sometimes, the idea that we would ever be targeted during a nuclear war nowadays is, to be honest, pretty laughable. Our oil reserves are not that extensive, our mineral resources are not that rich, and we don't have any real military strategic value at this point. In the 40s, during the Second World War, it was very different. We did repel at least one German U-boat that would have been off of Belle Island, and I believe that was in 43, though I may have that date wrong. We also suffered casualties during the Second World War, I believe, with the SS Caribou incident, where a U-boat sank what was essentially a passenger ferry. But I bring these terrible incidents to mind in order to illustrate how very distant they are. We're talking about incidents that happened over 70 years ago, or around. Well, no, actually, in one case, it's closer to 80 years. And just for the sake of my own edification, I need to check exactly when the Caribou was sunk. 1942. Okay. So, the pieces of pop culture that I have are the Don't Panic sign from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a little bit more flippant, and I've added the atomic energy symbol. The piece right here is the Bene Gesserit Litany against fear. Anyone who's seen the newest Dune movie has probably heard it recently. If not, you've read the book, certainly. And the text of the piece is, excuse me, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Now, Frank Herbert probably didn't intend that to be a particularly meditative piece of philosophical wisdom, but that is how I regard it. And while I don't necessarily chant it to myself, when I'm having a stressful time or feeling particularly anxious, I do remind myself of it in order to put myself in the mental state of understanding that fear is useless, other than as a warning. And allowing your fear to overwhelm you is beyond counterproductive. If you are Frozen by fear, you are both vulnerable and incapable of action, and both of those can lead only to disastrous outcomes. In the context of a Cold War or a potential nuclear conflict, the position you should be taking is one of resigned acceptance. If you're living in a small town in Newfoundland, as I was during most of the Cold War, there is very little you have any ability to affect when it comes to that situation. And while it is, in a existential sense, extremely terrifying, it is not, or ought not, to be something that paralyzes you. In the same sort of vein that many people are paralyzed by the idea of climate change or social upheaval, things of that nature. And that is then the excuse that they use, for example, not to have children. I'm sure people of my generation will remember others of their generation using phrasing like, why would you ever bring a child into this world? Things of that nature. That's I won't say stupid, but it is definitely a counterproductive point of view to hold. For instance, if you are paralyzed into inaction by your anxieties, then what you are left with is essentially a position of hopelessness. If you have no ability to change something and you still allow it to dominate your thinking, you are basically consigning yourself to madness. For myself, when I was growing up in the Cold War, there were some times when very rarely, I was born in the mid-70s, so the Cuban Missile Crisis was far behind us. And at that point, the world had settled into a comfortable understanding that should nuclear war occur, it would basically be the end of the planet because of the mutually assured destruction policy. With that, as odd as it is to say, there was a degree of peacefulness that should descend over you, a serenity of surrender, in that having no ability to affect the outcome of a particular situation, it allows you the freedom to focus on your reaction to it, or a choice to avoid reacting to it. Okay, I can close that again. Sorry, got distracted for a moment. But when you're in a situation where you have no ability to affect the outcome of a crisis, anxiety doesn't serve you. It is simply a cripple. It's a disability, a handicap. It is far better to put such things out of your mind and affect the changes you can in your environment. It's much akin to with the trucker convoy, for example. Much as I would have liked to have been able to get involved and to show my support in a much greater way than simply memeing or messaging online, that was all I had the ability to do at that point. And so I was left to talk about it. While it's not my preference, I prefer to act when I can. What else could I do but do what I could and put it out of my mind? Allow myself to relax as much as possible. When it came to the Cold War when I was a kid, There was no constant state of fear. There was no doomsday clock ticker on the news or on TV or on my internet feeds or whatever. There wasn't any internet when I was a kid. But the lesson that needed to be taken from it is that you should acknowledge and accept that you're anxious about it, and rather than dwelling on it and allowing it to make you mad, and I mean mad as in madness, not mad as in angry, though a certain degree of anger is to be expected. When you don't have the ability to affect an outcome, what's the point in being concerned about the outcome? There really isn't any. While I know this comes off as a bit vapid and dismissive of the horrors that are happening, I mean, it is a war, and people are being killed, people are dying, people are fighting. It's horrible, but without any ability to make meaningful change to that situation, all you do by being concerned is make yourself mental, and takes away from your ability to make positive changes that may actually have an effect down the line. For example, I used to volunteer at the SPCA, and if there was a problem animal, you would have one of two reactions to it. Either people would freak out and avoid the animal, or, well, actually you'd have three, because I would definitely be the third reaction to it, but I'm different. Not that different, but in any case, I'm sure there are others like me who would react exactly the same way as I did. What the two reactions that were not mine were either avoidance or avoidance of taking care of the animal, for example, pushing the responsibility off into someone else. Or you would get the person who would be absolutely constantly anxious and near paralytic with fear, yet would still engage with the animal. And that would be, to my thinking, a negative outcome for both entities involved. The dog would be left unaware that creating fear is bad, and the person who was experiencing the fear would be unaware that overcoming fear in a small way, for example, a dog that isn't going to bite you, but that is growling or unfriendly, overcoming that fear gives you the ability to actually do a good thing, taking care of the dog. In my case, I grew up with dogs, so I have no fear of them, to the point that I've attempted to pet coyotes in the past, the first time I encountered them. Something I would not do now, knowing what the animal looks like. In my defense, I thought they were some sort of malnourished shepherd cross. But with a difficult dog, I would, because of competence and skills that I've built over my lifetime, I would approach the dog and engage with it in a manner that I knew would cause it not to be more afraid and allowed me to remain relaxed. And the important part of that is that relaxation is key. I couldn't necessarily stop the dog from biting me, but I could take actions that allowed me to marginalize the likelihood of it. In much the same way, if you are afraid of something, you can take actions, or if you're anxious about something, rather, I should try to focus on the word anxiety and anxiousness. If you're anxious about something, focusing on the source of your anxiety, rather than the remedy for that anxiety, is where your crippling issue comes in. You become paralyzed by the fear of what could happen, rather than taking steps to actively cause a good outcome over a negative one. So, what this boils down to is relax. Don't be concerned about the things you can't fix. Don't be concerned about the things you have no control over. You have no control over them, and having anxiety and fear about them gives them control over you for no good reason. Hopefully this has helped some of you, and if so, do the whole like, share, subscribe, blah blah, e-begging thing. You can find all that stuff in the description. Anyway, have a good night. Love you all. Bye.